Welcome, dear listener, to Story Premise. This is a storytelling channel of fantasy, fiction, and folktales. Today we are bringing you the backstory of a desert rogue named Assad. Assad is a featured character of an ongoing story called Radiance and Corruption, which can be heard on this channel. In this story, you will hear the events that transformed Assad from a helpless orphan child into a clever and suave thief. This story takes place in the city of Myriad Mirage, where the desert spires touch the cloudless sky. The Orphanage Escape. Which of you children have heard the legend of the Scar? Several small hands shot into the air. Little Assad, however, kept his hands on his lap as he listened to the smooth voice of the matron. Let's see. How about Alegia? Aww. Several small voices whined in disappointment. The Scar is a big hole far in the desert. It's where we're from, a confident 10-year-old girl said. Precisely, praised the matron. The Scar is a vast ravine, or crack in the earth. Our great ancestors lived there long ago. Were you there? Ventured a curious lad. The matron laughed, kindly and warmly. No, my child, that was more than 2 centuries past, the matron said with a kind smile. But why did the people live in a crack in the ground? Why didn't they live here? Such wonderful questions. And that is where our story starts. Long ago, our ancestors didn't mingle well. They were so angry with each other, they lived separate, in their own tribes. Then, one fateful day, there arose a great sandstorm that covered the desert. It was almost impossible to see because of all the sand in the air. If you tried to walk, it took all of your strength to keep yourself from falling, for the winds were mighty. Worst of all, if you weren't vigilant, the sands could bury your belongings, and your tents could fly away quite easily. Unfortunately for our ancestors, the sandstorm lasted for many years. The children gasped. With each day, the sandstorm grew worse. The people needed to find somewhere safe to live. That is when they found the Scar. It would be the perfect place to protect them from the wind. But matron, how did they get food and water? What a great observation, Zirha. Down in the Scar was an underground river called the Zahish, named for the tribe that lived there. Plants and small animals lived near this river too. With these resources, the tribes of the desert were reunited and lived together in peace. The end. The children clapped and started chattering. The matron stood as if to go. Story time was over. Matron? Said a small voice. Yes, little Assad? The matron replied through the ruckus. The chatter started to simmer down. What happened next? To the people, I mean. I'm afraid it's almost time for bed. Please? Assad said, his eyes gleaming. We want to hear more, chimed in another child. The matron sighed. All right, but you have to promise me you'll all go to bed without fussing tonight. The crowd of children nodded eagerly. The matron sat back down in her chair and began to speak. Years passed, and the sandstorm calmed down. The people and the tribes thought of returning to the desert, but the Scar was safe and life was comfortable. That is, until one day the Zahish River began to run dry. The plants and animals started to die. The people dug downward, trying to find more water, but to no avail. The matron had a faraway look in her eye, captivated by the ghosts of a foregone age. It was then that their leader, known as the Jiva, took some hunters into the desert to find some more food. They came back empty-handed. Outraged, One of the tribal leaders, known as Vano, rebelled against Jiva Nabtu. The Jiva was exiled from the Scar, along with all who were loyal to him. Vano remained at the Scar, along with all who had lost faith in the Jiva. The matron's tone turned deathly serious. As he left with his people, Jiva Nabtu pronounced a curse and a prophecy. As Vano has betrayed the Jiva, both our peoples will suffer. No rest will be found for Vano's people until the blood of Vano and Nabtu are reconciled together in kinship. A collective shiver rippled through the crowd of children. Assad, who was 8 years old, felt it too, though he didn't understand all of the words the matron said. The matron snapped out of her trance, shaking her head. "All right now, children. I fulfilled my end of the bargain. Now you must fulfill yours. Bedtime. And no, Zirha, I won't answer any more questions. Off you go." Assad reluctantly went up the stairs and prepared for bed. The children got ready for bed by washing their faces with water from basins and by cleaning their teeth. To clean their teeth, there was a special plant called the gesho vine. This was one of a few plants that grew well in the arid desert. The leaves excreted an acidic substance great for removing stains on the teeth. Additionally, the vine strings of the gesho plant were small enough to clean the spaces between the teeth, yet hard enough that they wouldn't break easily. Assad hastily rubbed a gesho leaf on his teeth, the matron's chiding in his mind. "Use not foul words, and be sure to clean your mouth, for even clean words from a foul mouth doth banish friends." Assad didn't quite know what this meant, but he cleaned his teeth every night anyway. He finished up by grabbing the thin gesho vine and using it to remove some of the food in his teeth. Finally, he was ready for bed. Eventually, the matron came to Assad in his bunkmate's room. She tucked each of them into bed. As she bent down and kissed little Assad's forehead, Assad spoke quietly. "Matron?" "Yes, my child," the matron said with a soft smile. "Is a sandstorm going to hurt the orphanage here?" "Dearest Assad, even if a sandstorm came, the city walls would protect us. And I will always be here to keep you safe. Now dream peacefully, knowing everything will be all right in the morning." Yawning, Assad snuggled into the covers. His eyes slowly closed as he fell into a dreamy slumber, knowing that he would be safe because the matron would watch over him. Little did young Assad know that in the morning, the matron would be gone. After the matron's disappearance, the care of the orphanage fell into the hands of a different owner. He was an austere man with a vile temper. He set strict rules for the children. Playtime was outlawed, and creativity was crushed. Storytime became an intangible memory of the past. The man in charge demanded that the children address him as Hazim, which translates to sir or master in the common tongue. But the brave ones called him the warden behind his back. Indeed, the orphanage felt like a prison. While before, the matron fed them a variety of colorful and delicious meals, the warden only gave the children a gritty, tasteless sludge. As bad as it was, the worst was yet to come. The warden owned a mortar and cement production business. Assad and his fellow orphans were forced to perform grueling labor throughout all their waking hours, shoveling rocks and mixing sediment with various ingredients. If any children slacked or did not perform their labor up to the warden's standards, they were punished severely. The warden frequently withheld food or put insubordinate children in isolation. Years passed, and eventually Assad had had enough. His 13th birthday was coming soon, and he did not want to spend it in this prison. He was determined that he would celebrate his special day in freedom. Cool breeze drifted through the barred window of the sandstone room. Assad's eyelids were closed, but beneath them he was very awake. His heart beat rapidly with the pulse of a boy who would soon do something risky and foolish. Within a couple hours, Assad would be 13 years old. A dim candlelight passed under the door.
"They are all in their rooms and accounted for, Hazim,"
grunted a voice in the hallway.
"Did you lock all of the doors?"
spat a venomous voice.
"Yes, Hazim." "Check them again." "Yes, Hazim."
The door to Assad's room rattled a little in its frame. The candlelight passed the door as a dull footstep sounded on the stone floor. This was the usual routine. The warden's cronies would lock all the doors. A few were stationed in the hallways to keep watch and ensure no children would escape. Assad had spent many a night with an ear to the walls and floor, trying to learn their patterns. He always hoped to find some sort of opening or opportunity. There were none. Going through the house would be a mistake. The warden savored any opportunity to personally punish any runaways. But Assad had other plans. As the moon made its voyage across the sky, Assad continued to feign sleep. Once or twice he caught himself slipping into a doze. Fortunately, the snoring of Vilgar, Assad's petty bunkmate, kept him awake.
"Now is not the time to rest. I can sleep when I'm free,"
thought Assad. Time crawled on. Assad needed to be sure everyone was asleep. After what seemed like hours, Assad opened his eyes. All was still, save for the rising and falling of Vilgar's rotund belly. How that boy managed to stay so plump during the grueling labor was a mystery. But Assad had his guesses. Vilgar was a ruthless busybody and notorious tattler. Maybe the warden was bribing Vilgar with sweets, or extra food, or even reduced labor. Shaking away these thoughts, Assad crept across the room to the barred window. The lantern light of the desert city, myriad mirage, greeted Assad's eyes. A vast horizon of squarish, sandstone buildings stretched out before him, interrupted only by jutting spires and arches from temples and other architectural wonders. Winking lantern lights lit up the city, mirroring the gleaming stars above. Off in the distance, a vast sector of tents stood, rippling in the nighttime breeze. Assad hadn't been out of the orphanage for a long time, not since the days of the matron. The dusty streets were barren, save for the occasional tumbleweed. Long had this view inspired Assad. It had given him hope after long days of back-breaking labor. Some nights, Assad would stand here for hours, dreaming of the day he would be free. But the time for dreaming was over. Now was the time for action. Assad tiptoed back to bed. He reached into his pillow for his hidden stash of contraband. He pulled out 2 precious gold coins and several gesho leaves and vine strings. Previously, he managed to snatch the coins from the purse of one of the warden's minions. Assad was almost caught in the very act. Grinning at his good fortune, he pocketed the coins. However, the gesho leaves and vine strings were the most important items Assad had. He spent the previous few days saving these teeth-cleaning rations. Thankfully, the warden still let the orphans practice some level of hygiene, probably to save his ears from the complaints. Assad turned over the gesho leaves. They were a mottled green with serrated edges. Their fibrous surface was thick and tough. However, once wet, the gesho leaf would secrete its acidic substance. Assad turned his attention to the gesho vine strings. He ran his finger along one. Its surface was slightly rough and barbed. Although the string was thin, it was deceptively strong. Back at the window, Assad stuck one gesho leaf in his mouth and began to gently chew. The sharp and potent flavor erupted into his mouth. He then spat the leaf onto his hand and rubbed it across the surface of the vine string. Assad surveyed his handiwork. The string was dripping in gesho leaf juice. Assad ran his fingers along the string once more. The string's roughness, combined with the acidity of the leaf, would be exactly what he needed. Assad glanced backward to Vilgar's bed. The other boy was fast asleep. For a moment, Assad wondered if he should tell him about the escape. Surely his roommate would want to get out of here. Assad's expression darkened as he faced reality. Vilgar would not pass up this opportunity to rat on him. The brat would surely tell the warden about the escape. For that, Assad would lose his only chance of liberation. Assad turned his attention back to the window, or more specifically, the window bars. He looped his vine string around one bar, pulled the string tight, and began to saw away at the metal. The string glided across the bar's smooth surface. For a moment, Assad worried his hopes were in vain. After a minute of sawing away, Assad felt the bar. A small, almost imperceptible scratch lay across the distant side of the bar. Assad felt a twinge of excitement. Was it working? He looped the string back around and tried once again. Though Assad was sore from the day's work, he sawed away with vigor. A small stream of smoke began to come off the metal. The vine string was biting deep into it. After some time, the scratch on the bar became a groove. That groove deepened. Assad was successfully sawing through. Suddenly, with a snap, the vine string broke. This was to be expected. Assad set back to work using a fresh one. The minutes dragged on as a slick perspiration collected on his forehead. Just a little more. The string cut through the last of the bar. Assad's hard work had paid off. With this bar out of the way, he might be able to worm his way between the other two bars. But first, he needed to bend the rod he had just cut. Assad grabbed onto the top of the bar and pulled, slowly increasing the force he was putting on it. The bar moved but little. Assad felt himself growing impatient. Panting, he put his feet up against the wall and yanked with all his might. The shaft made a groan and slowly began to bend. Eventually, the bar stuck out horizontally from the window. He had done it. Suddenly, Assad made a horrible realization. The room was completely silent. The snoring had stopped. Assad turned his head cautiously with a grimace. Vilgar rolled over, making a smacking noise with his mouth as he continued dreaming.
That was a close one,
thought Assad. Now that the bar was out of the way, Assad might be able to squeeze his body through the window. But there was still one great obstacle in the way. The room was on the 3rd story of the orphanage. But Assad had a plan. He crept to his bed and slowly began removing his bed furnishings. If he tore his sheet and blanket, he would hypothetically be able to make a rope for climbing. Assad set to work. His blanket already had one tear running down the middle. The warden had refused to let him get a new one. But that cruelty made Assad's escape all the easier. Within a few tedious minutes of slow and quiet ripping, Assad had cut his blanket and sheets into several pieces. He tied them together with a series of simple knots. Now he was ready. He fastened his makeshift rope to the remaining window bars and looked down to the ground.
If this rope fails, I might not survive this,
he thought with a shiver. He looked back to his bed. For a moment he considered going back to sleep. Sure, he would remain a servant, but at least he would be alive. Then he looked back at the window. The damage was done. The bar was bent and his bedsheets were ruined. There was no going back. His only future lay through this window. His mind made up, Assad gathered his few possessions and squirmed through the bars onto the windowsill. The cool midnight breeze buffeted him as soon as he edged his way outside. When he had stabilized himself, he looked down. A momentary wave of nausea rose into Assad's throat as he gazed at the long distance downward. He forced the feeling down. Fortunately, he might be able to reach the windowsill one floor below. Unfortunately, that window led directly into the warden's room. No sounds came from it. Either the warden slept soundlessly, or the other kids were right in claiming that the warden never slept. Either way, Assad would have to be extra quiet when climbing past. Putting his faith in a rushed homemade rope, Assad gathered his wits and took a backward step into the open air. He lowered himself downward. His line held firm. Assad took a relieved breath. He continued to lower himself further. His feet were nearing the 2nd story window. Suddenly a loud tearing noise sounded from above. The rope! Panicked, Assad slid down, his hands burning. Not a moment too soon, his feet struck the lip of the windowsill below. The rope above was hanging by a single string. A close call. Suddenly Assad heard a loud voice from above.
What? Assad?
Assad looked up to see the menace Vilgar poking his head through the window.
Assad! Get back in here! Shut up, Vilgar, you!
The matron would not have been proud of the next few words Assad had said. Then a loud grunt came from the room in front of Assad. A thin sheet flew through the air as a figure stood up from the bed. A striking sound ensued, and a single match lit up the room. There stood a tall, unshaven man. Beneath his wild hair, eyes glowed with rage, eyes that then locked onto Assad's own pair.
What are you doing?
The warden yelled as he charged across the room toward Assad, his hand outstretched. Assad flinched, stepping backward in terror, but his foot met only air. He gasped as the world turned sideways and he plummeted toward the sandy street below. Smack! Assad hit the pavement flat. Wheezing, he slowly crawled up into a hunched position. He felt burning bruises all over his back. The sound of harsh yelling could be heard within the orphanage. There was no time. Assad staggered down the street, looking for a place to hide. Several alleyways split out before him. He stumbled down the nearest one, hoping that none of the warden's lackeys were watching from a window. A door slam sounded from the direction of the orphanage.
They're looking for me.
Deeper into the maze of alleyways, Assad shuffled, his pain starting to subside. The sound of boots on the ground spurred him onward. A dead end. Assad surveyed the area. He could hide behind the garbage can, but it was a big risk. That's when he saw the open window, just above an awning. Assad carefully climbed onto the lid of the garbage can. It was an unstable surface, but it would have to do if he wanted to reach the awning. Rubbing his bruised back, Assad braced himself, then leapt. He flew through the air, his fingers grasping for the awning edge. The garbage can behind him clattered and crashed onto the ground as his fingers caught the lip of the awning. Heavy footfalls could be heard approaching through the alleyways. His blood pumping quick, Assad pulled himself up and swung his legs one by one onto the rooftop. He then leapt through the paneless window and ducked behind the wall. Assad peeked back through the window and saw two silhouettes step into the narrow alleyway, a wild and wiry figure and a broader but shorter one. It was the warden and one of his cronies. Assad held his breath for a moment, afraid that he would be heard. The two men glanced through the area, checking the garbage cans and nearby boxes. Assad was grateful that he didn't linger below. After a few moments and some angry muttering, the warden slapped the back of the other figure's head, and the two men left. Assad breathed a sigh of relief, then looked around the room he was in. There was an assortment of stone desks and cabinets. One wall had various cubbies full of envelopes and letters. A table stood at one end of the room. Inkwells and quills lay there, with scattered papers about. It had all the appearance of a post office. He made his way silently to the stairs at the end of the room, then paused. It was then that a stark reality hit him. What was he to do if he escaped the warden completely? Assad looked towards the desks. Maybe he could write someone, asking for help, or for a place to live. Assad shook his head sullenly. He had no return address. Besides, he didn't know anyone. He had spent all his life in the orphanage, and since the matron's disappearance, never went anywhere besides the warden's workyard. After a moment of thought, Assad went back to the desk and grabbed a pair of ink jars. The matron would never approve of stealing, but these might come in handy later. He reached the bottom of the stairs, where the lobby was. Then he made his way past an empty clerk's counter, and to the front door. He put his ear to it and listened. The sounds of search still continued, but eventually the noise finally died down. Assad unlocked the door with a key behind the counter, then slowly pushed it open a few increments. The moonlight illuminated an empty street with a few dim lanterns. Assad had made up his mind. There was no place for him in Myriad Mirage. He could hide, but he had a feeling the warden would eventually find him, bringing him back to servitude in the orphanage. Assad needed to leave the city tonight. Assad wandered through the streets until finding a set of gates leading out. There were 4 guards in sight, 2 on the walls, 2 standing next to the gate. They wore traditional Sasni garb of the night watch. Black cloth wrappings covered all but their eyes, which were keen and alert. A leather cuirass and pauldrons lay over the garb. The guards at the gate rested their palms on hilts of sheathed scimitars, and the wall guards held crossbows. They patrolled at their posts, focused and determined despite the late hour. Curfew was in full force tonight. Children and teenagers like Assad would face trouble if they were caught out this late. Escape from the city was extra risky. These were trained desert warriors of the Sasni tribe. Their ancestry boasted of great skill in combat and stellar perceptive prowess. These were not the bumbling assistants of the warden's business. Getting past these guards would require speed and trickery. Assad crouched down behind the corner of a small building and emptied his pockets, laying the contents out on the cobbled sandstone road. He still had 2 gesho leaves and 1 vine. And then there were the 2 bottles of ink. A wry smile spread through Assad's face. He had an idea. He uncorked one of the ink bottles and poured the fluid on the soles of his bare feet. The ink was cold and tacky. Unfortunately, the warden didn't carry enough to supply the orphans with even the cheapest of sandals. After Assad finished spreading the ink over his feet, he stood and walked in the direction opposite of the city walls. Illuminated in the lamplight of the street, inky black footprints lingered behind. Assad walked a few hundred meters until his steps no longer made any stains. Then he retraced the footprints back to his hiding spot near the city wall. Assad had done many scary things this night, but he shook in anticipation of what he was about to do. He closed his eyes and took a few steady breaths. Then he ran out into the open street, right in sight of the guarded gate. The city guard stood silently a couple dozen meters away. Assad stopped in his tracks in false shock.
"Hey! Stop there!"
yelled one of the guards, who began to advance toward Assad. Assad turned tail and ran, right in the direction of his false trail of footprints. Behind him, the city guard continued to yell as he pursued. Assad rounded the corner and immediately dove over the retaining wall of a nearby yard. The Sasni guard was quicker than Assad anticipated, but thankfully not too quick. Assad heard rushed footfalls pass his hiding spot. He peeked upward, seeing the wrappings of the Sasni guard billowing behind him as he ran after the footprint trail. With a grin on his face, Assad climbed out of his hiding spot and followed another route to the city wall. The boy followed the wall back to the gate, sidling to the very corner of the gate's support beam. He slowly peered around the edge. One guard remained on watch, pacing and glancing around warily. Assad waited until the guard's back was turned, then darted around the corner and out of the city gate. There he saw the moonlit desert before him. Sandy dunes glittered, stretching out endlessly like a vast ocean. Just off to the south, some distance away, was a medium-sized cottage, with a large fenced-off area. Poking up past the fence were rows and rows of cacti, among other plants. How strange, thought Assad in wonder. He shivered. Desert nights were cold, and he had no blankets or cloak. He needed a place to stay the night. Maybe this cottage had blankets. With his mind made up, Assad trudged through the sand toward the cottage. Suddenly a shrill whistle rang out. The guards on the wall! Assad had forgotten about them. Panicked, he bolted. Yells and shouts continued behind him. He was much slower here, since each footfall sunk into the dense sand underneath. It felt like he was running in a nightmare, too slow to escape from the monsters behind. The cottage came nearer and nearer. Assad was about halfway there, when a great weight slammed him from behind. Assad got a mouthful of sand as he crashed into the ground. Spitting and gagging, he looked back frantically to see the Sasni guard on top of him. Assad wormed his way from under the great weight. It was a struggle as the guard tried to hold him, but Assad was simply too squirmy. Assad scrambled to get up, but the guard managed an iron hold on his ankle. Assad kicked and tried to escape, but the grip was too strong. Assad desperately reached into his pocket for some sort of solution and felt it. The last ink bottle from the pair that he had stolen. Assad unstopped it quickly. He looked back at the guard, who glared back. Assad lashed out, flicking the contents of the bottle into the guard's face. The guard screamed as ink spattered his eyes and mouth. He reached up his hands in a vain effort to rub the stinging liquid out of his eyes. Assad took advantage of the moment. He got up to his feet and ran faster than he had ever run before. The cottage was so close. He arrived at the door without slowing. Pounding his fist into the door, he yelled, "Help!" Assad glanced backward. More Sassani guards had caught up to their friend, who was now pouring a canteen over his face. 2 of the guards passed the others, and were approaching Assad hastily. Assad continued ramming his fist into the door. Lantern light was now visible through the cracks of the frame. Inside the cottage, footsteps could be heard approaching. A pair of hands grabbed Assad from behind, wrenching him backwards. A long metal scrape sounded, a sword leaving its scabbard. Assad cried out as he turned to look at his assailants. One guard held him in a headlock. The other raised his scimitar up to Assad's chest.
"Don't move, boy. You've already made enough trouble for yourself."
What are they going to do? Kill me? Worse, they will take me back to the warden,
thought Assad. Tears started to well up in his eyes. By now, midnight had definitely passed. This was shaping up to be a poor birthday. The door to the cottage creaked open. A man stood in the doorway, blinking sleep from his eyes. His brow was raised in a concerned expression. His skin was dark, even by Miragian standards, hinting at many days spent under the golden desert sun.
"What is going on here?"
he said.
"Nothing of concern, civilian. We have it taken care of. This boy breached curfew and ran through the city gate in violation of our laws. But worry no longer. He won't be bothering you again."
The guards pushed Assad toward the city, but Assad refused to move.
Please, sir, help me,
Assad begged as the guards tugged at him.
"Now hold on, soldiers. What is your name, boy?"
said the cottage man. The guards hesitated. Assad.
"Your tribe?"
I don't have one.
Assad looked down, refusing to meet the man's eye.
"What do you mean you don't have one?"
the cottage man said in confusion.
"Every Miragian does."
I'm an orphan,
Assad said with a tremble in his voice.
"What are you doing out here, in the middle of the night?"
I just wanted to get away from my orphanage. It's a really bad place. I don't want to go back. I won't,
Assad said emphatically.
"Your orphanage, you say? What orphanage would that be by chance?"
The cottage man's expression darkened. Assad darted his eyes between the cottage man and the guards. Was this some sort of trick? Was the cottage man in league with the warden somehow?
"It's okay, young Assad. Just tell me."
The worry lines under the cottage man's forehead deepened. Assad felt there was no getting out of this anyway. Reluctantly, he said,
The Desert Briar. I don't know the owner's name, but we're forced to call him Azim.
The guards and the cottage man exchanged glances. The cottage man bit his lip.
Oh no,
thought Assad.
Why did I tell him? If I'd just lied, maybe they would have brought me to another orphanage.
The cottage man sighed.
"Many thanks to you, Sassani warriors, for your help. But I think I can handle the boy from here." "What?"
the guard said in surprise.
"I think you heard me. I'll settle the matter." "But the boy, he broke curfew. He assaulted one of our own,"
said the guard sternly.
"As you know, curfew has a low penalty. As for the guard, that was an unfortunate matter. But the boy was probably just scared. Besides, the boy disturbed my home and my rest. Miragian tradition holds that I should have a chance to punish him as I see fit."
The guard stroked his chin thoughtfully.
"The boy must first be returned to the orphanage. Then he can be brought to you if you insist on punishment."
The cottage man gave the guard a long, hard look.
"We all know the reputation of the man who runs the Desert Briar, and I'm sure you know that the boy won't be brought back here. Let me receive my recompense, and I'll turn him over tomorrow night."
The guard opened his mouth to respond. The cottage man interrupted him.
"Before you speak, what is this matter to you, compared to the security of the city walls? I'll handle this. You get to the more important issues."
The guards muttered to each other for a few moments. One of them shrugged, and they released Assad.
"Now don't try any more mischief, boy."
And with that, the guards trudged away. Assad turned to the cottage man. The man yawned.
Sounds like you've had quite the night.
Assad nodded.
Are you going to punish me?
The cottage man snorted.
Of course not. I just said that to rid myself of them. Besides, I'm too tired. I've got another room in the cottage for you. Come inside and breathe easy. The worst is behind you.
Assad came inside. The cottage had a cozy atmosphere, and it was nice to be out of the night wind. The cottage man, who introduced himself as Uli, prepared Assad a warm plate of food. It was the best that Assad had eaten since the matron's cooking years ago.
Are you sending me back to Hazim?
Assad asked between ravenous mouthfuls. Uli paused.
No, I don't think I will.
Assad sighed in relief.
We can talk tomorrow about what we'll do with you.
After Assad finished his meal, Uli led him to a spare room. Assad slumped in the soft cushioning and fell asleep immediately. The next day, Assad learned many things. The cottage was situated on a farm that Uli owned. There he grew cacti and gesho plants, among other things. Uli's business was best known for supplying special cacti for Myriad Mirage's renowned cactus wine. Uli had a few farm hands who took care of the plants by day. Assad pried into why Uli chose to help him instead of sending him back to the warden. It turned out one of Uli's farm hands was once an orphan in the Desert Briar Orphanage. He left when reaching adulthood, as is customary, and told Uli and others about his horrible experience. Uli, being the kind man he was, saw Assad's nighttime arrival as a chance to make a difference.
To be honest, Assad, I would be glad to take you in and have you work here in return for letting you live with me. But I am worried that the man who runs the orphanage will search for you. He has a rather sour reputation.
Assad's hopes were dashed, but he knew this was true. The warden never let anyone get away.
But I can offer some help. I have a shipment of goods going to Tantar, a city to the northwest. I'll pay the caravan leader to take you as far as the city. I know it's not much, but it's the best I can do.
Uli bent down to Assad's level and put his hand on Assad's shoulder.
It's going to be tough, but I know you'll make it through, Assad.
Assad's eyes were wet. Nobody had spoken to him like this, not since the matron. A couple hours later, wagons assembled near the farm. Assad looked out at Myriad Mirage with its slanted walls, its tall towers, and pinnacled palaces. What awaited him in Tantar? What would become of the other orphans? What happened to the matron? The caravan leader whistled loudly. The wagons were prepped and ready to take Assad to his new life in Tantar. Thank you for listening. The events in this story are based on a tabletop RPG created by myself, and the decisions of the major characters are based on the choices of my friends. A special thanks to Zach Merrill for providing us with the personality and clever thinking of Assad. If you want to hear a continuation of Assad's adventures, please check out Radiance and Corruption, my featured fantasy story. Please like and subscribe for more stories like this.